Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining today's session, Debunking the Myth, Insuring Your MSP for vCIO Services. My name is Delta, and I have the pleasure of introducing our two experts who understand the complexities of the managed service provider space inside and out. We have Stuart Holtby from GetInSync Strategic Management and Doug Kreitzberg from Seedpod Cyber with us. Both of them were a part of the PitchIT 2024 cohort, which is an exclusive program that highlights innovative tools for the MSP market. And Doug is actually a top 3 finalist in this year's competition. In this session, we'll explore the common misconceptions around insuring your MSP for vCIO services and why these myths can hold you back from the full potential of your business. You'll learn the practical steps to take, ensuring that you're covered while maximizing your service offerings to your clients. So now I will turn it over to Stuart and Doug. Stuart?
Thanks, Delta. And I am completely jealous that you made it into the top 3. But as we talked just before we came on the show here, I called it like week 3 that everyone was like, hey, who's going to make it? And I'm like, Seedpod Cyber's for my inside bet. So congratulations on getting there. For those that don't know, the PitchIT program is put on by ConnectWise. ConnectWise, of course, is one of the larger PSAs that MSPs use. And it's a great cohort, 25 people in the PitchIT program 2024. So I don't know, Doug, do you have any other comments on the PitchIT program and your experience there?
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I don't know if I would have called it in week 3 myself, but really, I think the PitchIT program has been a great way to really kind of help all of the participants who are, really startups or near startups within the space to really hone the message, really look at the value propositions, that product market fit, as we talked about earlier, and get a chance to really work and get some really good feedback through that process. So, and I think the other thing is getting a chance to meet other partners in the space, like yourself and your organization. So pleased to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
That's great. So this format's just going to be the fireside chat, and it's not going to be death by PowerPoints, as they say, very few slides, but we're just going to chat about some of the controversy when insuring your MSP particularly, but also, the vCIO practice. And we'll talk a little bit more and define some of these terms, MSP, vCIO, if you're new to the game. Like I said, we don't have a lot of slides, but the controversy here is no, you cannot serve as their vCIO. And it's, like I said, we'll talk about what a vCIO is and some of the rationale as to why you would need a vCIO and so forth, but it's like, wait, what? Why can't I serve as their vCIO? And folks are saying that it's because of the insurance claims and the liability is too high. And we're here to bust the myth out. I know there's a lot of FUD, I guess, fear, uncertainty, and doubt on Reddit and a couple other things. What have you heard?
Yeah, with regards to the liability, when we're talking to MSPs, who are thinking about becoming vCIO or adding that to the portfolio, it does come around. I'm concerned about my liability if I'm in another organization who has more control than perhaps that I will, and yet somehow I'll be presumed liable for it. I can't really make sense for me to serve in that capacity from the insurance perspective. The other is when you hear of certain CIOs or CISOs being held liable, like it was done with SolarWinds a year or so ago in a court ruling of being held liable for, the CISO was held liable for certain actions that were taken involving an incident that occurred a few years prior to that. They're that just raises the anxiety.
That feeds into it, right? Into the frenzy, right?
Right.
And exactly. So do I have to stop being a vCIO? And I guess at this point, I'll define some of these acronyms. I know that sometimes we have our own jargon. So let's start with MSP. That's not the airport in Minneapolis. The other day I was traveling through Minneapolis and it's like MSP's on my ticket. I'm like, what?
There you go.
But yeah, so that's the airport code. But having said that, MSP stands for Managed Service Provider, and they typically are the outsourced, if you will, or co-managed IT group that helps businesses, small and large, with their IT services. And of course, they are an external entity. And so that's the managed service side. And then, of course, the vCIO is a virtual CIO, a chief information officer. I think part of the concern is the word chief in the title, and we'll get into that in our discussions, and the officer component of that. But for most MSPs, a vCIO represents more of that liaison or the astute business advisor that helps the organization map out their IT, for like a roadmap, if you will, a 2 to 3 year roadmap within the organization, and provide that bridge between the speeds and feeds, wires and pliers, and the business's strategy. Get in Sync is our platform that we promote. Of course, that's a plug there, but that does this type of vCIO, or it's sometimes referred to as fractional CIO. And then CIO, like I say, Chief Information Officer, is part on a part-time or a fraction. You're not big enough to use an employee full-time, and sometimes CIOs can be pretty pricey. So
Right.
you fractionalize that. Do I have to stop providing that service? And, how do I provide advisory services? If the trip up is that, like we mentioned, officer role. And I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit, Doug, in terms of
Right.
some people get a little twisted about being an officer of the organization.
Right. The term officer does have a formal legal association with it that could be in certain situations. You do find in contracts, as an example, that certain protections may not be afforded officers of the company, or that certain actions by officers of the company may not be covered, whereas employees or contractors or others may. In other situations, there's just additional liability that gets attached as an officer of the company. I think in the context here that we're talking about, it doesn't play, at least from an insurance standpoint. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I'm not sure that's something that really plays into issues as to whether an MSP should consider doing vCIO services. There are some other issues from an insurance standpoint, which we'll talk about later.
Right.
But I'm not sure that's the one to
Because
hang
it's
on
really
to.
a label, right? It's more of a
Right.
marketing term. It's not
Exactly.
implying that I'm actually installed as an officer of the corporation. I'm not signing documents on behalf of the corporation.
Right.
So I think the confusion comes in is if I am representing as an officer, that has fiduciary duties and so forth,
Right.
but this is more of a moniker, a pseudonym. I don't know what you
Right.
would call it, a pet
Right.
name
Right.
that we use in the industry. Okay, well, like you mentioned, you probably want to dig in. Let's just unravel, if you will, the knot of insurance, because it's always been an issue. And like I say, that's why I think you're going to win the whole PitchIT program that we talked about earlier, is that there's this black box and there's a lot of common misconceptions about insuring MSPs and these vCIO services. So can we bust the myth right off? Are we able to say that the myth is busted at this stage with the insurance that you're providing through CPOD Cyber?
Well, it is from that context here, and we'll go into what you should be paying attention to within an agreement, an insurance agreement, as you're looking to provide these services. And in particular, and you see here in the deck, there's something called Tech E&O and then cyber insurance. And I'll focus on the Tech E&O. That stands for Technology Errors and Omissions Coverage. Many MSPs have it already, and some do not, as we're finding. But what that does is it protects you as an MSP for the services that you are providing your clients. And the key for an MSP, especially looking at providing vCIO services, is to make sure that they understand, first of all, the services that they're providing, and secondarily, that those services are adequately described within the insurance agreement itself, because that's where you can be tripped up in providing services that aren't covered by the agreement. And some coverages will, or some policies will define technology errors and omissions in a very limited context. In other words, they're specifically describing the type of technology services. They almost like itemizing, this is what you're doing. It could be network design. It could be monitoring the uptime and making sure that the network is kept up. It could be adding or onboarding employees or offboarding employees. So they can be very specific.
Oh.
And then others are more broad here in terms of just generally providing technology services. There's another component, however, that's in this context of vCIO that you also have to pay attention to, which is something called professional services. And those services don't exist in a lot of technology E&O policies, the professional services. In fact, they're often excluded. But those services would involve non-technology services, which could include consulting, advice, and then certainly sometimes it gets specified into legal, accounting, et cetera. Now, presumably as a vCIO, you're not doing the books and you're not advising on legal, hopefully not for the businesses, but you could be talking about business strategy, and you could be advising with regards to it and what role automation plays with regards to the strategy. And then you start getting into the technical details of how are we going to operationalize this. But you are providing professional services. And if your policy does not cover professional services, you may be at risk if there's any type of suit against you here.
So that's, I guess, sorry, that's the good takeaway then, is that So what I'm hearing you say is that the vCIO piece has to be baked into that errors and omissions professional services, and if it's not, then there could be an issue. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and to make sure that those services are defined within the policy, or the policy is broad enough that would incorporate those. And to that point, most MSPs, they don't sit up at night reading insurance policies. I hope they don't. But they should be talking to someone who is well versed in technology errors and omissions that can help them with regards to making sure they're getting the right coverage there.
Perfect. And so, of course, that leads into the other half of this is the cyber insurance is a completely separate discussion.
Right. Yeah, the cyber insurance, what that does is it covers you in the event that there's actually an incident, that a cyber incident, and obviously that is created under your watch, so to speak. And there's two components to the cyber policy. The one is what's called first party costs. These are costs that you have to pay. As an MSP, it would be the cost of restoring your own systems or getting the forensics involved. And if it was a data breach on your own site, that would be the cost that you would have to spend for the credit monitoring and those letters that go out. Then the other component is the third party or the liability components. And so that's if one of your clients feels they've been negatively impacted by an incident and they turn around and sue you. So what you have when you have the tech E&O and the cyber together, and we'll just talk about the liability portion because that's what I think is most relevant here. If I'm a vCIO, I contract with a client and there is a cyber incident that occurs under my watch that the client feels was due to my neglect, they may sue me. And I would be covered under the cyber side of that coverage. If I was providing services and guidance and there wasn't a cyber incident, but I was negligent in performing my duties, I didn't follow through on what I said I was going to do, and there was some contractual provisions that I violated, and I get sued, that's where the technology E&O comes into play. So you really want those together in one policy to make sure that you're adequately covered there.
Yeah, like an experience that was recanted to me is that one of the vCIO fellows lost a particular piece of equipment. I think it was a laptop, and that got breached somehow. The email addresses of an association got distributed, those kind of things. So that's where the E&O would step in. Is that kind of the thinking there?
Right. In that case, it could actually be the cyber component, because if it was third-party data that was lost, the cyber would trigger on that there. And this is where it gets tricky. Being a vCIO is that you are working directly on a client's system, and you're also working as the leader of, in many cases, or at least a part-time leader of their IT department, and maybe involved in certain discussions on strategy, et cetera. And when a cyber incident occurs, there could be a question: was it because of your strategic, thinking that you created this? Or was it because you misconfigured, or under your direction, the cloud environment was misconfigured, so that created a vulnerability, et cetera. So that's where you really want to have the two coverages in place by one carrier, because otherwise you'll have each carrier pointing to the other saying it's their fault, and you end up having to spend money and wait for someone to line up behind you there.
Yeah, to pick a ditch, if you will. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
But yeah, no, a good tip. You often don't want to change carriers, particularly if you've had a claim.
Yeah.
Because you might in fact provoke. It's kind of like having too many credit cards, kind of thing. You're almost looking like what's the, too much of a risk. You're moving around too much. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So just switching gears then, you mentioned it earlier, find somebody, probably yourself, that knows this stuff inside out. So, I know that this is dependent on what the client themselves has for cyber insurance, right? So there's the MSP and the vCIO proper, but then those clients you're serving, can you shed some light on that?
Yeah. I think, before engaging, and we say this to MSPs, whether or not they serve as vCIOs, but certainly if you're going into a vCIO environment, you're going to want to make sure that business has cyber insurance itself, because when the incident occurs, for a number of reasons. First of all, the incident occurs within their shop. So it's their environment, and any costs that get generated as a result of the incident would be borne by that company in the absence of any insurance. Your insurance wouldn't pick that up there.
So to remediate the problem, they're on the hook.
Right, right. And of course, if they're on the hook, they're going to try to figure out a way, if they don't have insurance, to point the finger at you. And so that becomes a challenging situation. And your insurance may disagree and have to fight that. I would not engage as a vCIO with any organization that didn't have adequate cyber insurance in place
Right.
already. Certainly, you're depending upon the size of the organization, if you're under, and I hesitate to give out just blanket limits, but if you're under 25 million in revenues, $1 million of coverage as a business, typically, unless you're in healthcare or financial services, could be defined as adequate. Depending on, as you get larger, which in sometimes these vCIO engagements, you're dealing with larger firms, you're going to want to make sure they have 2 million, 3 million or so in limits in place here. And again,
That's a great tip. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. Yeah, and again, just to make sure that you have adequate cyber insurance expertise behind you if you want to have their policy reviewed.
Yeah, and I think, that maybe you can speak to this, but so as part of your onboarding process, you should be saying, yes, and I need a copy of your certificate of insurance, right? That's basically how they have to ask, right?
Exactly. And certainly they're going to turn around and ask the same thing of you, so which is fine, because you'll have it and you'll be in good stead there.
So it's not a laborious undertaking because their broker should be able to provide that really in minutes, right? Like it's not So requesting that certificate of insurance is one of your onboarding procedures that you would have. And then annually, I imagine checking the coverages and helping them.
Right.
And if you're the vCIO, should you not be counseling them a little bit, or at the very least getting them counsel? Like yourself.
You would most likely be part of that insurance discussion as the vCIO going forward, and certainly organizations like ours or specialists in cyber insurance specialists can help out both you and the client making the right choice.
Perfect. So changing gears just a smidge, you've got with the basic coverages that we talked about, the tech E&O and the cyber insurance, and of course making sure that your client's got the insurance. But as an MSP, is there certain conditions that I should be wise to, like my stack and that kind of thing? And maybe you can talk a little bit about how CPOD approaches that.
Yeah, when we first started putting together our program, and our program, by the way, we're an underwriter, and we've created underwriting criteria which aligns to both the Center for Internet Security, which is a best practice standard, as well as many of the tech stacks that MSPs are offering their clients. And to the extent that the clients are on that tech stack, they're pre-approved for coverage and they're eligible to save on their insurance. And we also have a program for the MSPs themselves. As we were putting this together, we really wanted to make sure that the MSPs, because they represent that last mile into the businesses that we're insuring, have the right security in place themselves and are providing the right security. So we spend time to really assess each of the MSPs as they become partners with us, and to your point, having certain things in place is really critical. There's certain baseline things that even clients, we look for in the environment. So that would include multi-factor authentication. That would include having a offsite backup that's immutable, data recovery testing as part of it, an EDR solution, making sure that you've got an email filtering in place, that you have security awareness training, that you have encryption on the endpoints and in transit. Your DNS includes SPF, DKIM, DMARC here, and an IR plan in place. Also, for the MSPs themselves, is really making sure that you've got good logging systems in place, that you have some type of alerting capability here, and in particular that you're locking down the RMM, that remote maintenance and management system, and the document system, or wherever you're maintaining your client credentials, because those are really the crown jewels of your organization from a hacker perspective. If I can hack you and get into that RMM and get the client credentials, it's not just one hit. I have as many hits as you have clients, and it's a big payday for me there. So those are the areas. And I would say, as we review the environments of the MSPs, in general, the areas in which we could see improvement or would like to see improvement would be in that logging and that alerting capability, as well as the incident response. Having a good, solid incident response plan in place goes a long way towards reducing the ultimate costs there.
That's interesting. And speaking of costs, so because CPOD has gone to this extra effort of what you just mentioned, that's quite the list, which is great. I mean, it's important to have that. You can use that as a sales vehicle.
Absolutely.
Because you say, we've got all this, we're pre-approved by the CPOD, and we've matched the or exceeded the minimum requirements kind of thinking, right? So,
right.
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 So, so the thinking there then is that because you have this standard stack, it, for MSPs, I hate to say makes it easy. It might not be simple, but it makes it easier, right?
Right.
To get the coverage you're needing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
cool.
Absolutely. And there, what we wanted to do is provide clarity, because the carriers and the insurance industry really haven't done a good job in providing, what do you really need to have in place? And so we want to make sure that we do that. And then certainly savings. So our clients, in some cases, they're saving 10x on their premiums. We had one in which that occurred. They're saving $8,000, $10,000, $20,000. As you get larger, obviously those numbers go up. In many of those situations, the clients don't have all those security controls that I mentioned in place. So the MSP is brought in to obviously, add in those additional controls so the client can take advantage of the savings. And so the client wins, obviously, and the MSP wins through the increased monthly recurring revenue that they're able to benefit from here, as well as making sure that their client is that much more secure. So minimizes future incidents.
So just on that tooling side of things, I know that different carriers have different things. And of course, I think we talked about this offline, but being in Canada, we're a little bit more unique. CPOD's pretty much the United States, right? Is that
right? Yeah,
okay?
We're currently limited to the US for right now, but we're coming in there hopefully next year.
Yeah, so you're growing into Canada, which we'll watch for sure.
Yep.
But I know from our perspective, the carrier did a whole stealthy, I wouldn't call it a hack, but a scan on us. And when we went to get insurance, and we had to remediate a whole bunch of things. Is there something similar that you guys are thinking of or offering, or is that in the MSP's court to do that kind of thing?
What we do is we do have the external scanning. So we'll do external scanning, maybe similar to what was done within your environment. The way that we get that behind the firewall look for the clients is, in some cases, we've already pre-underwritten the tech stack that the MSP is offering. So if we know that the client is on that tech stack, it's been deployed according to the SOPs that we've underwritten, then we can move forward. And we're beginning to fine tune that even more now. We've created an integration with ASIO, which is a ConnectWise remote maintenance and management system. And we're beginning to build other integrations where we can now pull that data out and then provide the MSP with basically a risk assessment of the client that shows the gaps that they have with regards, for insurance, and it's based on CIS controls. So it has some other applicability, and they can have that intelligent discussion with the client. And we not only provide the gaps from a risk standpoint, we also provide them with claims-based data to help explain to the client, this is your cost of risk. This is you're in manufacturing or construction, professional services. Here's the minimum claim costs that have been paid out over the past couple of years, the maximum, the median. Here's the reason why these, what percentage of claim costs came versus, it was due to social engineering attacks, business email compromise, ransomware, et cetera. And here are some things that you can do about it. So the business itself can begin getting a sense of, how much does this really cost if I do nothing, right? What's the potential? And that way they can then look at how much does it cost if I do something, right? If I mitigate it with the controls, as well as the cost of insurance, because we find that, I'll just speak to the cost of insurance. The businesses, there's still a lot of businesses who haven't purchased cyber, and they're thinking with regards to how much it costs versus what it can cost is a lot different. And once they see the real cost, certainly working with an organization like ourselves, it's easier for them to think about incorporating that into their risk management.
Well, and that's an excellent point, because I know in conversations that we've had with clients and MSPs, they're like, well, when's the last time I used my fire insurance and my house hasn't burnt down? That kind of flip thinking. It's all about offsetting the liability, and obviously it could be a not only a career-ending event, but it could actually do away with a couple of companies, your MSP and the customer you had. I mean,
exactly,
and not to mention the reputation risk that you're suffering. Good luck trying to find new clients, and I think you just have to ask CrowdStrike how they're feeling these things.
I know.
They might have to change their name. I mean, some people, they'll never forget.
No, I was just going to speak to the CrowdStrike. That CrowdStrike also, involved another piece of coverage that many may or may not have had. And the CrowdStrike is something that will probably occur more often than not. It was a software mistake, maybe an execution and deployment mistake as well there. So it wasn't malfeasance. It wasn't a hooded hacker getting into the environment.
Exactly. Black hat guy.
Right. And many of the cyber insurance policies only cover for that hacker type event from a third party, and they don't cover in the event that it was just the systems were down for a period of time. We worked with MSPs about, I would say about a half dozen of our MSPs were running CrowdStrike environments. Fortunately, they all looked like heroes because they were notified about it early. They took the time quickly to get it resolved, and there was minimal downtime with their clients. But and then some of them, most of them, who were insured with us certainly had the coverage in place, so their costs were covered as a result of that too. So.
Very interesting. So yeah, there's kind of like upstream, downstream, midstream,
Right.
in terms of the kind of the whole, if you will, the Venn diagram of
Yes,
insurance coverage.
exactly.
Uh,
Exactly.
yeah. But yeah, so we're just up to the end, and the last question is: so if someone is listening and they're like, "Holy doodle," like I do, where do I start? Like, do I just I call my broker and say, "Give me a certificate of insurance to start to see what I've got," and then is that how
Yeah.
would you? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple things. One, if you're thinking about getting into the vCIO services, make sure that your MSA, Master Service Agreement, is modified to incorporate that. We can help certainly in providing you with some guidance, but an attorney is really where you're going to want to be with that. From the insurance standpoint, certainly get the certificate, get the policy from your broker, your current policy. We'd be happy to review it or make sure that it gets reviewed by a tech E&O cyber insurance expert that is looking at your master services agreement, looking at the insurance, looking at your website, when any marketing that says this is what I'm doing or intend to do, and make sure that it's all aligned there. And then obviously make sure that you are, as we talked about, asking clients for proof of their own cyber insurance. And then, I think there's a lot of opportunity in that fractional space. There's a lot of companies that can't afford a full-time IT leader. And for those MSPs who, have the capabilities and the bandwidth, I think it's a great opportunity.
Well, that's a great segue. So we busted the myth, but it might have an asterisk on it, right? You
Right.
can't do nothing and just call yourself a vCIO, or for that matter, consultant or advisor. I
Right.
guess it really comes down to the fact that you've got to have your proverbial ducks in a row when it comes to having coverage, and not only that, but your clients having the correct coverage, which you should be helping them for it anyway. So any thoughts on this whole relax? We got you covered. There is protection, and we can debunk the myth now. I guess the thing that I think is the takeaway for me is that they're interconnected, right? The tech E&O and the cyber insurance definitely have to be looked at holistically. And what I heard you say too is that MSA is really critical.
Yeah, the MSA, and the tech E&O and cyber, those are the critical things. And if that's lined up and you're working with a client that itself has cyber, you should be in good stead and able to confidently move forward and grow. So
perfect. The key takeaways, I think we covered that on the last slide, but what is the whole vCIO thing? Do we put that in the MSA somehow to say we're not an officer of the company, and is there some disclaimer?
Yeah, within the MSA is certainly with respect to these kind of managed or co-managed relationships here. You're going to want to make sure that you're defining the services that you're going to provide. You're going to want to make sure that you are also identifying what you won't be providing as well. You're going to want to also make sure you're defining the time period and obviously the fee structure, et cetera. That's usually on your endorsement or amendment. And you're going to want to define what your expectations of the client will be. What are their roles and responsibilities with regards to this here? So, and then there's obviously the kind of the indemnification provisions. What's the, what's the limitations of what they could attempt to achieve with regards to this? Those are typical contractual issues here with regards to the MSA that you should be thinking of, in addition to what we talked about with regards to the insurance.
Smart. Of course, this will be recorded as well. And for those that want to get a hold of you or your associates, we just threw this up here. Just head over to your webpage. Is that the best way to
head over to our webpage. You can reach us at sales@seedpodcyber.com, or obviously there's contact info there as well.
And I like the page here, and the reason I screen capped it is this is something for those advanced MSPs really wanting to boost their margins and their status with their clients. And that's what we're, it's not just a Joe Trunk Slammer kind of MSP. And I'm sure you could coach those guys up, but but it's really the stringent security requirements that you're trying to, make happen.
Right.
So that's awesome. And then of course, also shameless plug here for Get In Sync. You can head on over to getinsync.ca as well. You can book a discovery, and certainly between Doug and myself, we can hook you guys up with a conversation around insurance and whatnot. It's really about having the ability to make confident decisions about where you're going. IT is an enabler, but as the old story goes, if you don't know what direction you're going into, any road will take you there. So with Get In Sync and the vCIO, get clear on where the business is going and get them the IT to make sure that they get there safe and sound. So that's about it. I don't know, Delta, if there was any questions that came through, if there's anything else you want to do in terms of closing us off here.
I have no questions for either of you, but I just wanted to thank you both for your insights. And as Stuart mentioned, if anybody's looking to reach out, you can reach out to Stuart or Doug directly and connect with them on LinkedIn.
All right.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate the talk today.
Yeah. Thank you, Delta. Thanks, Stuart. It's a great conversation. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.
All right. Take care.